Sometimes in life, we're going to fight whether we want to or not. Fight a sickness, fight with our friends, fight falling asleep, big fights, silly fights. Sometimes we'll win fights, sometimes we'll lose fights. But what if I told you there was someone who will fight for us? Someone who loves us no matter what. Someone who promises to take care of us. Would you believe me? Or would you fight against the truth? I hope you choose to believe in the truth that God fights for us.
Redbirds, go! Redbirds, go! Redbirds flying so high. When we win, we'll touch the sky. Woo! Oh! Hey there, Kids Club. I didn't even notice you were there. I was practicing my fight song for my favorite team, the Redbirds. Now, a fight song is like a cheer, and that cheer you do to support your team. Now, the song is supposed to give strength and power to your team, and it also hypes them up. Now, if you're in a stadium like this, well, that fight song can get really loud. It can even confuse the other team. Now, I'm dressed for a Redbirds game, but let me gear up for the best team. I'll be right back. That's better. Now, when I was young, close to your age, I chose to be a part of the greatest team ever. Some people call it Team Jesus. Other people call it God's team. When I chose to be a part of this team, I knew I was joining a team that never lost. Literally, God has won every single battle, fight, situation that has ever faced his team. That's because God fights for us. Wait, back up. Oh, no, not you, wait. T, what does that mean? That's a great question. What does it mean when I say God fights for us? Does it mean that when we're losing in a basketball game with 2 seconds left on the clock, God comes in, shoots a three-pointer, and wins the game? I don't think so. So what does it mean? I believe it means that God will always be there with us through every hard time. God is ready to take on all of our problems. He's going to be with us even when we're afraid or if we're nervous about what might happen. Even if we don't understand his plan, God will be there to fight for us. Kind of like this guy from the Bible. His name was Gideon. Let's check his story out.
God's story. Gideon. So part of God's story is about a man named Gideon, and it begins like this. Israel, God's special family, had turned against the one real God and worshipped idols. They had forgotten how God had loved and cared for them and needed a reminder that he was the one in charge. So God took away the Israelites' farms for 7 long years. Whenever the Israelites planted crops, God would let another nation called the Midianites sweep through and camp on Israel's land, ruining everything that was growing there. But even though his own family had forgotten him, God still loved them deeply. So, at the end of the 7 years, God appeared to a young Israelite named Gideon. God said he was going to free the Israelites with Gideon's help. Gideon, however, wasn't so sure, so he asked God to prove himself by performing a series of miracles. Gideon said, "If the fleece is wet with dew in the morning but the ground is dry, then I will know that you're going to help me rescue Israel as you promised." That's what happened. Just to be sure, the next night, Gideon asked God to do the opposite, make the fleece dry and make the ground wet. And God did it. Next, he even sent a sign through an angel. Gideon was finally convinced that God was in his corner, so he called together an army to fight against the Midianites. Now, normally having lots of people is a good thing when you're about to battle, but like I said, God does things a bit differently. He told Gideon that the Israelites had too many soldiers. If they won now, God knew the Israelites would say it was because of their own strength and brag about it. So, God wanted Gideon to have a smaller army. Gideon was nervous, but he did as God asked, which is always a good idea, by the way. He told his men that if they were afraid, they could return home. With that, 22,000 soldiers left, leaving Gideon with about 10,000. For you math whizzes, that's 2/3 of his army just poof, gone. Even after all that, the army was still too big. So God told Gideon to take the soldiers down to the water to drink. And then, Send home the soldiers who drank out of the stream like dogs. Again, Gideon did what God asked and was now left with only 300 soldiers. God knew Gideon was probably worried, so he told him to sneak down to the enemy camp where Gideon heard soldiers talking about a crazy dream where a loaf of bread rolled into the Midianite camp and over their tent. One soldier said that could only mean that Gideon would triumph over them. Gideon returned to his own camp confident that he would win the battle. He divided his men into 3 groups and gave them each a trumpet and a jar with a torch inside. Not usually what you bring to a fight, but God had a plan. Gideon's army reached the edge of the Midianite camp and then went into action. They blew their trumpets, smashed their jars, and shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon!" And don't forget, they did all of this without a single weapon in their hands. Terrified, the Midianites fled, accidentally attacking each other as they went. In fact, they ran so far from the battlefield that other Israelites were able to capture and defeat the leaders of the Midianites. With the enemy leaders gone and their army running away, God had saved Israel, just like he said he would. And that's the story of Gideon. So, in case you missed it, here's the quick version. Israel turned away from God. God reminded them he was in charge. God said he would save Israel. He would use Gideon. God performed miracles for Gideon. Gideon gathered an army. God made it smaller. Much smaller. Soldiers had a dream. Gideon's army surprised their enemies. The Midianites ran away. God used Gideon to save Israel. And that's a part of God's story.
So, what'd you think of that story? Pretty amazing, right? Could you imagine going into a big battle only to be told you have too many soldiers? Wild. Now, if it were me, I would have had all the questions for God. But in the end, I would trust him. When God says he's got something covered, I believe it. And so did Gideon. God can do anything, even the things that feel impossible. And guess what? We can choose to believe that God can do anything. I believe that God fights for us. And I know that that looks like a lot of different things. So when we get back from break, I'll give you guys an example of a prayer I say when I need God to fight for me. This could be a great time for you to talk with someone around you about what kind of fight you have in your life. Whatever fight that may be, remember, God fights for us. So ask him for help. Play ball! When you hear the word fight, what do you think about? Maybe you think about a big battle like what Gideon was facing. Maybe you think about a fight that's in your mind, like when you're struggling to make the right choice. Maybe you think about a fight that you can't control, like when someone gets sick. No matter what the fight is, you can pray to God and ask him for help. Praying is when we talk with God. You can pray at a stadium. You can pray at lunch. You can pray standing or sitting or laying down. You can pray in your head. Or you can pray out loud. Basically, you can pray whenever, wherever, or however you want. The key is to just do it. Now, when I'm facing something challenging or I need God to step in and fight for me, I may say a prayer, something like this. Feel free to repeat it after me. Dear God, thank you for loving me. I'm having a hard time right now. I could really use your help. I know you will fight for me. And I trust that you will protect me. I love you. There's no one above you. Amen. Great. Now, if you said that prayer with me, good job. You can also say a prayer that's similar to that, or you can come up with your own. But just remember, God fights for us. Now, earlier when you guys were at break, I came up with a fight song of my own to help me remember that God fights for us. You want to hear it? Great. Now, where did I put my ukulele?
Sometimes in our lives, we'll have to face some fights. Some big, some are small, but there's someone we can call. Some fights can make us scared, and some fights we aren't prepared for what's in front of us. But don't you worry one bit, because God fights for me and you. God fights for all of us, and that's something we can trust. God fights for you and me. God fights for all of us, and that's something we can trust.
It was great hanging out with you today, Kids Club. Remember, God fights for us. So that means you and 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 me too. All of us. Continue to believe that God will protect you and trust God every day because He loves you. I'll see you soon.
And that's something we can trust. God fights for you and me. God fights for all of us, and that's something we can trust.
Know what I got?